Hello, everybody. Welcome back to my 12 Rules for Life series. If you haven't seen any of the previous episodes, I'm going to be reviewing and summarizing each of Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life. This is episode 10, and Rule 10, be precise in your speech. Peterson's main argument in this chapter is that you should be precise in your speech because it allows you to accurately articulate to others what it is that you want. And to accurately articulate to others, you must first understand yourself, which means you have to confront these issues instead of put them off on the side and wait for them to grow even more prominent. Peterson opens this chapter by talking about how we never really see any of the behind the scenes things unless we need to. Like most of the time on brain default mode, our brain just it only sees things at a very very surface level, but then when a problem arises, we begin seeing more complexity within that issue and the deeper levels of it. I believe the example he gives in the book is a car breaking down. Like most people when they're driving, they're not actively thinking about how their car is allowing them to move. They're thinking about driving. But then when their car does not move forward, then they go, oh, something's wrong, there's an issue. And if they can't fix it themselves, they have to go to a mechanic, and then it starts revealing all these underlying aspects that go forward into the very simple act of just driving straight on the road. And this realization that there's a problem often leads to us being forced to zoom out. We can no longer focus on, just driving on the road. We need to focus on the problem. And that usually leads to a lot of stress and anxiety, which is why people tend to avoid these problems. We don't like solving these problems because if acknowledging that there is a problem requires us to do work, well, that's work we have to do, right? And even if we do realize that there's a problem, the idea that our solution could be wrong is often also very demotivating. So, this leads us to either intentionally avoid a problem or be aware of a problem but not do anything about it. And that's not good because the problem is that problems do not go away on their own. They only grow bigger and bigger and bigger until they reach a point where they can seriously, if they are not dealt with immediately, they will make a serious dent in your life. Peterson compares this idea to the moral of a children's book called There's No Such Thing as a Dragon. And just as a quick plot summary, pretty much what happens is a small dragon just kind of like suddenly appears, and the boy sees it, but his mom refuses to acknowledge that there's a dragon. But the dragon keeps growing bigger and bigger, and eventually it moves their whole house. Other people can see it, the dad can see it, the mailman can see it, but the mom, even despite their house literally being picked up and moved, still does not think there's a dragon. Basically, the mom is refusing to acknowledge that there is a problem, which is, the dragon. And if our dragons are big enough to move our house, that is, they've gotten out of control. We want to deal with them when they are small and manageable. In these types of scenarios, ignorance is actually the exact opposite of bliss, because even if in that moment you have bliss, it's only going to come back and hit you harder. Because while you are doing nothing, guess what the problem is doing? The problem is growing and growing and growing. The dragon is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And you cannot ignore it forever. Like I said before, there will come a point where at some point you just need to deal with it. Luckily, though, precise speech can help us solve these problems. Before I read this chapter, I confused precise speech with concise speech, but I don't think that Peterson is saying be concise in your speech. He's saying you should be precise in your speech, meaning know exactly what you are saying and why. Peterson also talks about comparing your problems to that of a medical situation. You're looking for symptoms that caused a diagnosis. And a bit of a side note, but going off this medical comparison, most sane people, assuming there's no financial barrier, will not feel, chest pain and just say, you know, it's no big deal. I'm just going to like walk it off. I'll probably be fine. What most people would do is they would immediately go to the hospital and get it checked out, even if it's just a little chest pain, because if they let that sit and there actually is a problem, that problem will grow so profound that, their life will probably be at risk. Once you've acknowledged that there is a problem, you've figured out what the problem is, you figured out why it's happening, and you have some idea of what you're going to do about it, you are able to actually grow from this experience. And this is especially good if you kept the dragons or the problems small and manageable, because the stress associated with those is much lower, and thus you have more room in your head to think about growing than just solving the problem, or your mind isn't so occupied with being stressed about the problem. You can actually take time to formulate a reasonable thing to learn from. Being precise in your speech is also beneficial for relationships. Think about it. If you have a problem that you want to discuss with someone else, and you come in knowing what the problem is, why it's happening, and what you should do about it, you've laid such a solid foundation for that conversation to actually lead into change that will be for your betterment. And this is where the ideas of precision and conciseness actually overlap a little bit, because you do not want to come in with like a bucket list of these problems and just be naming them, all going off a list on someone, just like wailing on them. Peterson says pretty much that's not going to lead to a productive conversation. It's just going to lead into a shouting fest talking about how much you hate the other person, really. And nothing's getting done like that. But if you come in with one or maybe a few related topics and you can say what they are, why they're happening, and what you're going to do about it, that can lead to some serious, meaningful changes over time. So basically, to recap, you should squash problems while they're still just bugs. If you do it like this, the stress will never accumulate to be so high that it becomes unbearable, and you can also then take these as opportunities to learn. So, no matter how small or big the problem is, I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I solve every single problem that ever pops into my head. But just knowing, keeping in the back of your head that the more I wait on this problem, the worse it's going to be. Just that very much like tear off the band aid mentality, I think is, really the way to go. We don't want those dragons to grow. And that's all I really have to say. Have a good day, you guys.